Histamine issues are very diverse. There can be environmental triggers, such as airborne allergens. There could be triggers from food. And in fact, what I now see a lot in clinical practice is triggers that people that trigger with everything, simply because their immune system has become so hyperreactive to even the slightest, seemingly simple threat in their environment. And so today in this video, I'm going to go over 8 underrated ways that I have found to support histamine balance in the body. The first one being something I talk about all the time, which is getting regular morning sunlight. I don't think a lot of you know this. Maybe you do. Sorry if I'm insulting you, but histamine follows a circadian schedule, meaning it has circadianly aligned release and clearance patterns. And these are really helpful in stimulating the immune system at key times while downregulating it at others. An enzyme that's also used called in the histamine breakdown, especially in the gut, called a DAO or diamine oxidase, it also follows a circadian pattern throughout the day. So getting natural morning sunlight is just one of the main things that we encourage in order to set a strong circadian rhythm. Tell your brain the morning has started. When you tell your brain the morning has started, the eyes capture the increasing amount of blue light coming from the sun as it goes higher and higher into the sky. And remember, those little sensors in the backs of the eyes, the melanopsin receptors, they communicate the time of day to the clock in your brain. And that gets communicated to every cell of the body to optimize all processes. But if you're currently dealing with a histamine burden or mast cell challenges, this is a seemingly simple but very important thing you can do in order to support your body's ability to clear histamine accordingly. So if we don't get that strong circadian rhythm, what different studies have shown is that you are absolutely more prone to having an overabundant production of histamine all day long, which can lead to symptoms of histamine intolerance. And remember, that can be brain-based, it can be allergy-style symptoms, it can be gut-based, it can be hormonally based, like PMS, PMDD. So one of the things I wanted to read this quote here. So this one says that environmental and lifestyle factors. So this is from an actual article studying the connection between mast cell activation, the development of allergic disease, and circadian rhythms. And what they found was, and this is again as a direct quote, that environmental and lifestyle factors that disturb normal rhythmicity of the circadian clock can lead to loss of circadian control of mast cell activation. Consequently, the degree of mast cell activation, here's the kicker, becomes equally strong at all times of the day, which may clinically result in worsening allergic symptoms. Translated, that means if your circadian rhythm is not in sync with the night dark cycle, if your brain cannot tell what time of day it is or what time of night it is, the body then instead allows for more mast cell activation all day long. Because not knowing circadian timing is naturally a threat to the body. And when the body perceives threats, mast cells are on the ready. And so when we don't have good circadian rhythmicity, mast cells stay active all day long. Again, the activation is equally strong all day long, which may clinically result in the worsening of allergic symptoms, may make you histamine intolerant to everything all day long. And so something simple that we can do, and I talk about this all the time, and it seems so basic, but it is to go outside for approximately 10 to 20 minutes in unshaded light. Try to get yourself into direct light within about an hour of waking. No sunglasses, ideally, so eyes open, no sunglasses. You can do this while going on a walk if you want, but just be intentional about essentially looking up into the sky, whether it's cloudy, rainy, foggy, snowy, sunny, and just getting that natural signal into the eyes. That will help really strengthen your circadian rhythm. And if you have a suspected DAO insufficiency or a SNP that impairs the ability of DAO to clear histamine from the gut, you can actually start to sync meals with histamine release and clearance, and that can be very beneficial. And so the general time frame recommendation for this, everyone's a little individualized, is to eat any meals that you suspect may cause a bigger histamine reaction midday. That is naturally when circadian wise, when DAO activity tends to be higher, and to especially avoid histamine producing or histamine triggering foods later on in the day. So what's next? Number 2, earthing and grounding. So contact with the earth does a lot of things to actually just put the body into a calm state. So that contact with the earth pulls charge up through the earth. That charge acts as free electrons to calm inflammation. To support mitochondrial health, so reducing markers of inflammation, normalizing cortisol and melatonin rhythms, independent of controlling for your light environment. It balances brain waves to put the body into a balanced state of autonomic activity, as opposed to having both parts of the autonomic nervous system on edge, or just the sympathetic stressed nervous system on edge. And so when you can balance the brain waves, you balance the breath rate. When you balance the breath rate, you balance the flow of cerebrospinal fluid. Essentially, you're sending this continuous message that there is no threat. When our brain waves are in high beta, when our breath rate is more rapid, then it should be at rest. When we have excessive inflammation in the body, all of those are indicative of a potential threat. So our immune system becomes more reactive. Our body is more likely to degranulate histamine at the slightest little tiny threat. And so earthing and grounding is very, very underrated. And it doesn't only support histamine balance, it supports so many different aspects of health. So any type of inflammatory condition, supporting brainwave balance could be really great for things like anxiety. I've had clients who attend towards heart arrhythmias. And again, this is not medical advice, but one of the things that they have found very beneficial at normalizing a heart rate rhythm is to go outside barefoot and allow Earth's charge and the Schumann resonance of the Earth to bring that heart rate back into rhythmic beat. It improves HRV. So there's a lot of things that we can talk about when it comes to earthing and grounding. Now, what are ways that we can support this throughout our daily lives? Well, if ever you can, use your bare feet and make contact. And it doesn't have to be feet, it can be bare hands, it can be bare skin, but make barefoot contact outdoors with grass, with sand, with trees, anything that's growing has roots into the ground, with water, flowing water from streams. Try to maintain bare skin contact with it for 20 to 60 minutes daily, whenever possible. I know that's not always possible. I used to be completely disconnected, wearing gym shoes, like essentially sneakers to the gym at 5 a.m. and sneakers back home, and then being indoors all the time. But even once I started to learn this, I loved to take my shoes off and go outside and take little breaks where I'm not only syncing my circadian rhythm, but I'm also pulling Earth's charge, harmonizing my brain waves, things like that. So 20 to 60 minutes whenever you can outdoors. Supplement it indoors as well. So there's beautiful grounding products that we recommend here, especially from companies like Intuition Physician, where you can have a little grounding mat. I have one right now under my work desk. You can have one where you normally sit. Some people love to sleep with a grounding mat, which again has been shown to normalize melatonin and cortisol rhythms independent of light exposure. And so ways that you can stay grounded and also tell your body there is no threat. Histamine levels can drop. Number 3, we want to talk about mitochondrial hydration, or just mitochondrial function in general. Mitochondria, through things like their energy production, through biophoton signaling, which is as mitochondria flow electrons and flow charge to make water and ATP, they naturally produce reactive oxygen species in little amounts, right? That's healthy. And those reactive oxygen species are actually biophotonic in nature. They're little light, it's like a little light show. And the way that the mitochondria releases light and produces these biophotons shapes the behavior of our immune cells, including mast cells. So when mitochondria are when we have mitochondrial dysfunction, which can be from things like toxins, it can even be from stress, it means that the mitochondria are not going to be able to produce ATP effectively. They're not producing water effectively. They're more likely to be producing excessive biophotonic signaling, excessive reactive oxygen species. Which means that all of a sudden they are going to start to signal the immune cells to have exaggerated mast cell degranulation. And so you're all of a sudden going to, the immune system says, oh, there's something threatening that cell. It's threatening those mitochondria. We got to produce a lot of histamine to be on the ready in case something comes out of that cell and we're ready to get it. And so doing things that support mitochondrial health and mitochondrial hydration can be very beneficial. I'll give you some ideas as to what that looks like in a little bit. And I'm going to tie it in and say one of the main things gets highly beneficial, first morning light, but also red light therapy. I'm going to talk all about red light therapy in a second and its ties to histamine. But the connection between cellular dehydration and histamine goes even further. An Iranian researcher and physician named Dr. Batmangalij found that low-grade, unintentional but chronic dehydration, which is in clinical practice, it is super common these days. It triggers this compensatory pathway in the body, in which the body starts to release a lot of histamine. And in this instance, histamine isn't responding to like the threat of a pathogen, or an environmental trigger. Histamine is acting as what's called a drought management molecule. It has the ability to open and close capillaries in areas where we want to divert hydration and nutrients because it looks like it's lacking. We want to divert hydration and nutrients to the most essential organs and take it away from the non-essentials. And that causes just a general increase in histamine in the body. And Dr. Batmangalij has literally, quote unquote, cured asthma, allergies, autoimmune conditions simply through proper hydration. So don't underestimate what chronic dehydration can do when it comes to elevating a histamine burden all throughout the body. So simple ways to support this: have a good daily hydration strategy, especially first thing when you wake up in the morning. I always like to start my day off with things that will hydrate my blood and hydrate the space around the cells, which is where the immune system lives, which is where those mast cells are more likely to degranulate and cause a big histamine release. And that means I'm drinking high quality structured water and I'm doing some sort of form of ocean-based minerals. So I'm either taking my high quality structured water and adding Soleil, which is a dissolved salt concentration, into my water and drinking it, or I'm doing my glass of water and Quinton isotonic minerals. That combination is supremely hydrating to prevent that dehydration induced histamine burden in the body. Now, next, though, we have to be aware that in that space around the cells, that's where our lymphatic system and our connective tissue is as well. We got our extracellular matrix, we got collagen in there. And if that's adhered and we can't actually move hydration into that space, then we got to address that. So simple myofascial release techniques like using a foam roller. And there's really great videos out there in terms of how to use a foam roller for myofascial release. Topical heat, because infrared stimulates flow, including lymphatic flow. And then even things like gentle rebounding or dry brushing can go a long way towards reducing histamine burden because we have hydrated blood, hydrated and flowing lymph. That lymph is no longer stagnant and no longer able to be this place where these mast cells can just continually to dump histamine in the tissues. Number 4, molecular hydrogen. I just got off of a phone call with the owner of Axiom, which is a top-notch molecular hydrogen company. And, I'm always continually amazed by the anecdotal evidence that continues to come out in the world of molecular hydrogen beyond the massive amount of booming scientific research that surrounds this little molecular gas as well. So molecular hydrogen, it's a gas. And that gas is tiny, tiny. It's literally 2 hydrogens stuck together. And those 2 hydrogens then have the ability to calm inflammation because they carry electrons that can calm inflammation. And so there's actually some interesting research. And there's lots of delivery methods for hydrogen, whether it's dissolved in water, taken as a tablet, inhaled. Now, inhalation is most definitely more expensive, but can come with massive therapeutic benefits. Regular therapeutic levels of hydrogen-rich water can be great. And taking hydrogen tablets appropriately can also provide a really great benefit. And the research around molecular hydrogen and how it appears to influence mast cell activation, mast cell degranulation, and therefore histamine release is showing that that actually, if it's taken beforehand, it can prevent an overreactive immune reaction or an overreaction of mast cells releasing histamine. So there's this a particular research article that says molecular hydrogen suppresses blah, 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 specific, signal transduction pathway that would normally increase histamine production, and instead it prevents degranulation of mast cells. And so researchers found that molecular hydrogen in this particular study delivered as hydrogen-rich water completely abolished an immediate type style of allergic reaction in mice, meaning we're talking about anaphylactic reaction. This immediately abolished it. They also studied several other pathways involved in mast cell activation and found that there was significantly less mast cell activation and degranulation, meaning less histamine release in many different pathways that can be stimulated here to increase histamine production in the body. And so the implications of this are that molecular hydrogen are acting upstream. So there's a signal upstream, a threat upstream. The mast cells are sensing this threat upstream and they're just degranulating and releasing histamine. And so what molecular hydrogen appears to do, at least in this study, is act upstream of that and essentially prevents the mast cells from seeing the threat in the first place so that they don't overreact. And again, molecular hydrogen acts as an adaptogen, meaning if the body needs to react to something, say there's something in there that the body needs clearance, it actually can help the immune system see what needs to be cleared. And in other instances like this, it can calm the immune system. So it acts in a very intelligent adaptogenic way. So ways that we can support this, number one, we can take molecular hydrogen first thing in the morning. I typically add this into my morning hydration stack along with an earth-based mineral like beam or shilajit. So after my water with my ocean-based minerals, I'll take beam or shilajit. Those are earth-based minerals. They've got this really powerful affinity for the inside of the cell. I wait about 5 minutes and then I'll either take hydrogen-rich water, a hydrogen tablet. I will at some point throughout the morning, usually it's after I would drop the kids off at school. And then when I'm sitting down just to do computer type work, I'll inhale molecular hydrogen. So there's a lot of ways that you can do it. And in fact, the beauty of this is it has such a high safety profile, you cannot overdo it. There are anecdotal studies of people inhaling hydrogen for hours only to receive more and more of a powerful therapeutic benefit, say in Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, concussion/TBI. It's fascinating to see the research and to hear these anecdotes. Number 5, let's talk non-native EMFs. And let's call it really what it is. It's wireless radiation. So it's radiation that's being emitted from things like cell phones and wireless workstations and cell phone towers and the Wi-Fi router and your wireless headphones and AirPods and your smartwatch. And anything smart or Bluetooth is emitting wireless radiation. So in other words, it's everywhere these days. And there's a very clear direct mechanistic link between non-native EMF exposure and histamine release or mast cell reactivity. And it ties directly to what's happening at the level of the water inside of the cell, what's happening at the level of the mitochondria. So first and foremost, before we get to those direct mechanisms, non-native EMFs are inherently dehydrating, meaning they are always continuously vibrating the water in our bodies, and that those vibrations can reach a threshold where they're dehydrating. A really prime example is you don't cook meat in a microwave or it completely dehydrates the meat because that microwave is emitting on a massive scale in a short time frame, massive amounts of radiation that is vibrating the water molecules so violently it heats the water molecule, it heats the food, but those water molecules also disappear. They vaporize essentially. They become water vapor and they disappear. So you inherently dehydrate the meat. On a slower, long-term, but very robust scale these days, due to the amount of non-native EMFs we're exposed to, that's happening to all of us. And we can't do much to control it, right? I can control what's around me, and I'll give you some tips and tricks in a little bit about how to support it. But I can't control if a cell phone tower gets put up over there, if there's a satellite flying above head that is emitting this type of radiation. So non-native EMFs are inherently dehydrating. Go back and listen to what I talked about dehydration and histamine. Secondarily, they're a threat to mitochondrial function. And so there's a massive amount of research on non-native EMFs directly causing mitochondrial dysfunction, meaning if mitochondria aren't making the water, if they're sensing a threat, if they're producing a ton of reactive oxygen species, the immune system says, uh-oh, continuous threat right now. Let's make sure the mast cells are on the ready. But there's a third thing that I want to talk to you about beyond these. Non-native EMFs can increase mast cell activation via something called voltage-gated calcium channel overstimulation. So let's break that down. So number one, mast cells are a type of immune cell. And not just mast cells, all cells have on their outside a little channel that's called a voltage-gated calcium channel. meaning it gets a signal and it opens, this channel opens. And in this particular channel, calcium comes into the cell. And calcium's designed to pulse into the cell. Boop, boop. Did you need the sound effect? And when calcium pulses into the cell, it creates a secondary messaging effect that causes a pathway to get stimulated. And that's great. We want pathways to get stimulated. This pathway, now this pathway, now this pathway. What we don't want is for those channels to stay open all the time, because if they're open all the time, calcium will flood into the interior of the cell. And that is a very dysfunctional environment for the interior of the cell and for the mitochondria. Cells drain of charge, mitochondria become more dysfunctional, a very aggressive amount of reactive oxygen species, especially the most damaging reactive oxygen species, such as the hydroxyl radical, start to get produced. And so now that's happening in every cell. But when it happens in mast cells, continuous activation of the voltage-gated calcium channels, pulsing is how they release, essentially they degranulate calcium, or they degranulate histamine. So on mast cells, they're designed to receive that little pulse like, oh, there's a threat, boop, release some histamine. Now we're just gonna chill for the rest of the day. Oh, there's a threat, boop, release histamine. We're gonna chill for a few hours. Imagine what happens when the mast cells themselves have those channels open all the time. When they're open all the time, they're getting the continuous signal to produce and release, or to degranulate, which is essentially release histamine into the, typically into the space surrounding the cell. And that can cause massive histamine symptoms, massive amounts of inflammation. That again can look like such a diverse type of symptom profile. And it is also directly, my hypothesis is what it directly leads to, for some people, electrohypersensitivity. So if you're that person who's near wireless radiation, you start to feel ill, likely something going on with the mast cells and the voltage-gated calcium channels are at play. So in other words, this is a huge, this essentially keeps the body and the histamine levels elevated a majority of the time, because they're not just, these EMFs are not just damaging mitochondria and causing dehydration, they're literally changing the threshold at which your body perceives safety versus threat. And when that threat level is elevated like this, histamine is going to get released all the time. So how can we support this? Well, number one, I tell people, control what you can control. The most basic ways you can do this are to not have wireless radiation on your body. So cell phone on airplane mode or away from your physical body, not using wireless headset, wireless, smartwatch, smart ring, anything like that. Like, keep the wireless stuff off of your body. Hardwire your workstation if at all possible. So like, I'm running on Ethernet. I've got hardwired headphones, everything is hardwired. And if you can't do that, take breaks, separate yourself, use some molecular hydrogen, because that can also help with high non-native EMF environments. Turn your Wi-Fi router off when you sleep. Unplug things because there is non-native electric fields that can be running through the cord. So unplug things when they're not in use. Unplug stuff in your sleep environment. So there's a lot of things you can control, and then do the best you can with all the other stuff that you can't. But not having it on your physical body goes a long way towards supporting voltage-gated calcium channel activation. Number 6, red light therapy. I already alluded earlier that red light therapy is very beneficial at supporting mitochondrial water production. So it can be very helpful in the whole dehydration scene, in terms of supporting and rehydrating the intracellular environment. Molecular hydrogen also is shown to rehydrate the intracellular environment, as measured by things like what are called phase angle. But there's interesting research that's emerging regarding the connection between red light therapy and improvements in histamine-based symptoms. So you actually have things like double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled, or actually this was a sham-controlled human trial, and they found that applying 6 minutes of red light therapy reduced histamine-induced itch and skin hypersensitivity compared to a sham. So essentially humans, they were going to do something that they knew would increase histamine and itch in the skin. What happens if we actually pre-treat the skin with red light therapy before we induce the itch versus not? And they showed a significant improvement in histamine-based symptoms there. In animal models of seasonal allergies, they found that local, and I can only imagine sticking a little red light therapy probe up like a mouse's nose. But in animal models, they found that local, so essentially red light therapy directly in the nose and through the sinuses and the nasopharynx, reduced mast cell degranulation, thereby reducing allergy style symptoms, right? Postnasal drip, runny nose, itchy, watery eyes, that type of thing, because it lowered various inflammatory markers like leukotrienes, thromboxane. We don't need to go into the details of those. And interestingly, when they compared the local, so through the nose essentially type red light therapy, that was what showed the effect, not full body red light therapy. And so what appears again is that very similar to molecular hydrogen, red light therapy works upstream. So if it can improve mitochondrial water production, if it can improve cytochrome C oxidase activity, which it's been shown to do, which is where water is made, that's going to lead to improved biophoton signaling in the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are not signaling a threat. There's no dehydration in the cellular environment or the space surrounding the cells. And so therefore, the immune system can chill out because the immune system is essentially balanced, and then a state of hyperreactivity is ultimately diminished. So in other words, the reactive threshold that typically triggers a histamine response gets reduced when you support it with something like red light therapy. So what can this look like? Well, if you're looking to support allergies, specifically the ones that will present symptoms in the sinuses, it looks like getting something like this Solewell torch and putting the torch and attaching the intranasal, the tip on it where you can stick it in your nose and shine red light therapy into your nose. It appears as though that could be a very supportive therapy when it comes to that type of allergy-based symptoms. But in general, if you're just looking to support mitochondrial water production and mitochondrial health, full body red light therapy for histamine-based symptoms, including there's pads that you can get that wrap around the abdomen. So let's say there's uterine-based symptoms, gut-based histamine symptoms. Red light therapy can be very soothing and very supportive when it comes to that. Number 7 is cold adaptation. I found this research very interesting as I've been researching cold exposure over the past few years, 5, 6 years. And so what this is showing is that histamine in this instance, just like it's not just an immune, molecule, where we heard about it being a drought management molecule in the body. In this instance, histamine is acting as what's called a thermoregulatory neurotransmitter, meaning when you get cold, the hypothalamus, part of the brain, right, detects a change in body temperature, and it signals histamine release, and that histamine release via things like the increase in what's called norepinephrine, it'll actually trigger a part of our body, our brown adipose tissue, which is tissue that's really rich and dense in mitochondria, but not like it's an adipose tissue that's not pinchable, not the pinchable fat, but it's like a type of brown adipose, or a type of adipose tissue that exists kind of up here where I'm pointing to my clavicles, the upper back, the tops of the shoulders. That brown adipose tissue is full of mitochondria, and when they sense cold and get the signal, they open a channel called UCP, and that UCP channel floods protons back into the middle of the mitochondria, and the movement and flooding of protons generates heat for the body. So it's a way that we can thermoregulate in response to the cold. And so said another way, histamine essentially senses changes in body temperature. And with cold exposure, there's this activation of the sympathetic nervous system. This brown fat gets activated. Mitochondria get the signal that they need to make heat. And when mitochondria get the signal to open that UCP to make heat, inflammation is not produced, right? So it's a very healthy, efficient way to increase mitochondrial heat production. So in this context, histamine is acting as like a pro-adaptive molecule, not like this problem molecule. So this is where it's really acting as a signaling molecule, a thermoregulator in the body. That's probably the better way to say it. Okay, so how can we support this? Now, there's nuance to this because if the body is already in a state of threat, so if I've got clients who are already in this state of histamine reactivity, I don't want them doing a 35-degree cold plunge for 5 minutes. That is too aggressive for them. I want them to do deliberate, acute, non-threatening cold exposure, like literally 30 minutes in 50-degree air with, lighter layers on. Or a full body cold plunge if you're interested, more at 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit for maybe 3 to 5 minutes. All it takes is for the body to start to sense cold. And when the body starts to sense cold, that whole pathway, that thermoregulatory pathway gets triggered. But again, if it becomes too aggressive, that acts as just yet another threat to the threat burden that the body faces on a daily basis. Last but not least, number 8 is UVB light. So here's an interesting thing, because initially, especially in people who don't go outside and get ultraviolet B light on their skin, initially UVB light exposure can cause a massive histamine release. We're talking massive histamine degranulation. And I've had clients who it's like literally it feels like intense itching pain and burning on their skin within seconds of UVB exposure. And so that's what we call an acute initial reaction to histamine, because the body is sensing this UVB light as a big time threat. And the skin cells are essentially saying, we've reached a certain threshold, we're going to dump a bunch of histamine. We're going to show that this is a threat. We're going to make the skin red and itchy and pink and painful, and we're going to get you out of that situation. But if you slowly adapt over time, and I'm talking clients, I've had clients who got to go 30 seconds this day, 45 seconds now, a minute, a critical threshold is reached. Maybe it's 5 minutes, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 15, maybe it's 3, but a critical threshold gets reached where the body no longer senses that UVB light as a threat. And instead, when you get slow, consistent, gradual UVB exposure, you get something called mast cell stabilization, as opposed to a continuous dump and increase in histamine release. So there's actually a downregulation or decrease in reactivity, normalization of histamine, less just immune reactivity in general. So gradual process, but I highly encourage you to build what we would call a solar adaptation to UV light. And so how do we support this? Go outside in UVB light. If you think you're highly sensitive, start with 30 seconds, come back inside. And we're trying to expose our skin to this as much as you can. Next day, go out, like I said, 45 seconds, 1 minute, slowly build it up and observe your body's response and reaction to it. And what's going to start to happen is if you are experiencing any symptoms of histamine, a histamine trigger, and that histamine trigger can also be through the eye, like the light through the eyes can trigger a migraine. I've seen that as well. So slowly and gradually build up and see if your body can reach that critical threshold. I've had many, many clients do this so that now their body can tolerate UVB light at whatever dose and intensity they're looking to apply to it. And they get a reduction in their body's total histamine burden as well. So key ways that I think are underrated that we can support histamine. Think about which one resonates with you, which one you haven't tried consistently, and slowly but surely start to apply these strategies and see what happens to the histamine levels in your body.